Hello, I'm Will, and this is Mike. We're the Tabletop Donkeys.
Hello.
We're bringing you the final video in our Warhammer Age of Sigmar Mortal Realms series. We're going to be looking at the overall collection and then giving you our thoughts on it. So we'll have a sort of in-depth discussion in a moment, but first I'll hand you over to Mike, who's going to go over the entire collection that came with this magazine.
Okay, so we'll have a look at the Stormcast collection first. So there's a total of 79 models. You can see all the heroes in the front, but at the bottom left we have the Lord Ordinator, and then the Lord Exorcist and the Lord Relictor, the Knight Azeros and the Lord Arcanamon Gryph-Charger behind them. The Celestant Prime taking centre stage. And then we have the two Knights in Cantor, so the one from Soul Wars and the one that came with the magazine, Andre Azrabolt. Then we have Neve Black Talon and the Knight Questor, and behind them we have Astrea Soulbright and a Lord Arcanum on Celestial Dracoline. Then moving to the middle, we have over on the left you can see all of the Sequitors. So the three in front are the easy to build ones, and then the two sets of four are the ones from Soul Wars. We have the easy to build Castigators with their Gryph Hounds, and then the 5 Castigators from Soul Wars, and then the Judicators are behind them. We have the Fast Riders and the unit of Vanguard Raptors with long strike crossbows, the Aether Wings behind them. Then there's the unit of Evocators from Soul Wars, and the unit of 3 Retributors from the Thunderstrike Brotherhood, and then the 3 other Gryph Hounds. And then on the right is Stormsire and his 2 Cursebreakers, and the set of 10 Liberators, also from the Thunderstrike Brotherhood. And then finally at the back we have the 2 Celestial Ballistas, the 2 Evocators and Celestial Dracolines, and the 3 Prosecutors. And then going over the Nighthaunt, so there are 94 Nighthaunt models in this collection, and we'll go over from left to right starting at the front. We have the Tomb Banshee, the Guardian of Souls, the Spirit Torment from Soul Wars, and then Crawlock the Jailer. And there's Lady Olander and Kurdos Valentian, the 2 Lords Executioner, so the one from Soul Wars, and then Icaron, the Executioner. And there's the Knight of Shrouds on foot, and the Kenwraith. And the next rank is the Briar Queen with her Thorns, and the 2 Chainghasts that come with Crawlock the Jailer, Reikenor the Grimhailer, the Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed, came with Soul Wars, 2 Dreadblade Harrows, and there's a unit of 4 Mireborn Banshees. In the bulk of the army in the middle, we have 20 Chain Rasps, 10 Dreadscythe Harridans, 10 Bladegeist Revenants, and 9 Glaive Wraith Stalkers. And then the back rank is 5 Hexwraiths, 3 Spirit Hosts, the Mortis Engine, and 9 Grimghast Reapers. And you can see the terrain on the back. We have the Sigmarite Mausoleum and the Azerite Ruins, a lone Sigmar statue, the Azerite Bell Tower, the Fallen Sigmar head, and then there's the Time-Worn Ruins, which also came with a statue of Sigmar, and then on the right is the Storm Vault. And also in the middle there you can see the Range Ruler and the dice that came with the magazine. Obviously we used more from our own collections. Not seeing any of the paints, but it did come with 32 paints, although some of them were repeats. And 3 brushes and a texture tool, but obviously we're not including any of the premium, any of the tools that came with a premium or subscriber gifts or any of that, because we didn't get it. But I'll hand you over to Will, who will can go over some of the cost savings of the collection.
Yeah, so as we've said several times through the series, overall there are some excellent savings with this. With every issue that you got models with, you were making a saving. All of them were at least 40% on the price from the Games Workshop store at the time that the magazine was released. That's not counting any discounts you might get from independent retailers, but it's still a very good saving. Some particular savings of note: any of the £20 heroes like the Lord Exorcist or Knight of Shrouds on foot, for example, they were about a 60% saving off the cost price, getting the magazine for $7.99. Anything that was £25, so that's some of the heroes, also the Vanguard Raptors and Aethwings, or the 5 Hexwraiths, that's a 68% saving. Lady Olander and Kurdos Valentian are 71% saving, because they were £27.50. The Celestant Prime, if you were to use your own base rather than buy the issue that came with the base, is a 68% saving. A few of the things are not available anymore, but I think mostly the terrain isn't available. There's a few of the models as well, like the Castigators from Soul Wars. I don't think you can get them anywhere anymore. Mostly it's all still available.
Not sure about the Knight in Cantors. You might be able to get the one from Soul Wars separately. Some of these sprues from Soul Wars are being sold, like that came with all the Nighthaunt heroes.
And actually those issues that came with sprues from Soul Wars or from the Thunderstrike Brotherhood, for the Stormcast in particular, were very good savings for the number of models you got as well. If you were trying to build up an army, if you were able to get multiple copies of those issues, they're very good saving for sheer number of models. Same with Chain Rasps as well, 10 Chain Rasps in an issue, or even the Dreadblades and the Harridans as well. Not quite that level of saving as those other things, but still very good per model. Not so much on the paints and hobby tools. In fact, some of the issues with paints, we were actually making a loss technically. It's cheaper to buy the 2 paints separately rather than buy the magazine. But the Citadel Skulls were a very good saving, less than half price for both of those issues for Citadel Skulls if you wanted to get some of those. So in general it's very good for beginners because you're getting a lot of models to get you started for less than you would be able to pay, or less than you'd have to pay if you wanted to buy them separately. And also I guess for veteran collectors or anyone just starting to start a new army really, you could actually get a lot of this for very good value.
These magazines to Conquest as well, it's also kind of thing you could do with a friend and have an army of each.
Possibly worth mentioning the premium kits as well. We didn't get any of those ourselves, but you got 4 premium kits, each with the start of 4 different armies that weren't these 2. So there was Sylvaneth, Khorne Bloodbound, Iron Jaws, and Flesh Eater Courts. That it was an extra £1.99 per issue, in the UK at least, so adding up to about £160 over the collection, but you got about £300 worth of models from those 4 kits. So actually a good saving as well, and a good way to start another army as well if you wanted to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's a much better way of doing it is if you really want to. Gives you a much bigger view of what's available in Age of Sigmar than Conquest did.
That's, I guess, an overview of the whole collection. Talking about the magazine itself, well, starting out, obviously, the magazine was not just gaming content. There was obviously quite a lot of lore involved in it as well. A decent amount of lore, then painting and hobby guides, and then the gaming content. So same kind of distribution, basically the same. I think that was a good format for Conquest. It seemed to work quite well with this as well. Actually, we said in our conclusion to the Conquest series that because there's so much lore in 40k, towards the end it almost felt like they were trying to cram it in, or need to mention all these subjects. Whereas with this, it almost felt like they were fishing around for things to say. That is just the fact that Age of Sigmar is a much newer setting, as it just doesn't have as much lore in it, but things where it didn't really seem that interesting or that relevant. Yeah,
and a lot of things like the strategic map of what's happening in the Realm of Fire, say, is a lot of events that didn't seem all that relevant. There was things like the Khorne Demon being released that was led up to, but a lot of the times it's just things that there's some the Nighthaunt fought against the forces of Tzeentch. Although some of it I think was done fairly flavourfully, like the Book of the Dead. That's quite good.
Yeah, actually that was a fun thing with the in-universe reports and that sort of thing.
You have to think the thing they do with Imperium now, you have actual battle records and it can actually have backstory. Oh yeah, that's another thing actually, is how there were some named characters like Lord Ordinator Sturmfell and Reyes Glory Mantle and Zandria Agibolt and Briar Queen early on. I mean, especially the Nighthaunt they would have a named Knight of Shrouds and that was sort of it, and they wouldn't be brought up again. And there are lots of named liberators or prosecutors or sequitors who usually just died in the little short stories they're introduced in. And it didn't feel like there was sort of any main characters. There was Lady Olinda, I suppose, and the Assistant Prime at the end, but even they didn't show up that often.
Yeah, and actually that doesn't compare very well to Conquest, where we had a set of characters who went all the way through the magazine and the story. They popped up quite often in the story, and their personal fortunes, particularly with the Death Guard characters, were relevant to the games.
Conquest had Lord Felthius and Lord Gangrus as the competing Plague Lords, and Captain Asheran and Lieutenant Calcius as well.
Whereas this, as you say, particularly towards the end, even the characters we had from the beginning, like Anastasia Starstrike and Zandria Agibolt, didn't really turn up anymore. But for a very long time, the flavour text didn't really tie into what was going on in the game either. The flavour would say, oh, this is happening, and then the game would just be, oh, kill it. They have to kill everybody, or they have to capture the one objective in the middle of the board, and that's the level of story in the game. I think Conquest did that a lot better in terms of having story-driven missions. Where towards the end, it did get better. As you mentioned, the Khorne Demon thing, where it actually introduced a special rule into the game, that was a bit more interesting. Yeah, that was one way in this magazine I think it
fell short
of what had been established in Conquest. I think a little bit.
I think also possibly the first 20 games of Conquest were on a really small board, so I think maybe they were forced to be more creative then. Whereas here we moved fairly quickly to a single battle map.
Before we move on to talk about the games properly, but we quickly mentioned the painting guides. Again, very similar to Conquest, starting from very, very basic, building up to good looking models by the end. We need the texture paint and the skulls, so pay attention to the bases a bit as well, just make them a bit more interesting with a flat colour.
And there was that one little tutorial on how to build your own objective markers, which is nice.
And the overall production quality of the magazine as well was pretty good. I think, if anything, better than Conquest. There seemed to be fewer mistakes. There were a couple of minor rules mistakes in places, but we'll talk about those in a second. But overall, they do intend you to. Some of the bindings on the side weren't very good and they fell apart, but you are technically supposed to put them in a binder that they give you the first one for free if you're a subscriber, and then you have to buy the other ones. But so they do deliberately bind them quite weakly, so you can actually do that. Talking about the rules in general, because obviously they did teach you to play the game if you were new to this, the pace of introduction of the rules was much slower than it was with 40k Conquest. Not a bad thing, I don't think. It did take you through the basics one step at a time, so if you were completely new to this, hopefully it was a good pace of introduction. If anything, perhaps too slow rather than too quick. I think Conquest perhaps was too fast. I think they introduced an awful lot in the first few issues.
I suppose you should say that there is now a 3rd edition Age of Sigmar, which is kind of different to 2nd edition. This magazine possibly reflects an attitude that is less popular now. Something with War Scrolls, a lot of the War Scrolls will say this unit can be any size, whereas now, if you have a unit, it says it has 10 models in it. There are rules for taking under-strength models, but it's assumed that you will take a full set of it. And if you want to add models to it, you add another 10 models to that unit. You don't have a unit of 15 or whatever. That probably is a bit of an issue with things like the 3 Retributors and the 2 Evocadors and Dracolines. Also the 9 Grimghast Reapers, which come in a unit of 10 normally. And you get 9 Glaive Wraiths, whereas their unit size is 4, so you have a guy left over. Honestly, I'd probably just take the extra Glaive Wraith and say he's a Grimghast.
They were new War Scrolls quite often, but not new game rules. Most things you'd need to know in Age of Sigmar, I think we probably covered within the first 25, 30 issues, I think.
I think if you got this and then went into 3rd edition, you'd be fine. The only new things in 3rd edition are things like heroic actions. I mean, there are also monster abilities that happen in the charge phase where we don't get any monsters with this collection. And priests have rules, which would only affect the Lord Relictor. He has basically the same abilities, it's just he has an extra keyword that gives him access to other abilities. So he's like he's more similar to a wizard. Yeah,
this magazine didn't actually finish before 3rd edition Age of Sigmar was released.
Yeah, we were held back due to world events, unfortunately.
We are finishing this a long time after the fact, which is worth bearing in mind. But
yeah, and also pretty all of these units have new War Scrolls, and they are pretty much all of them have changed, but possibly not. The actual role the unit plays hasn't really changed, just more to do it. And some of them, like the Guardian of Shrouds, is basically unchanged, and he has an extra point of damage. That's about it. Things like the Spirit Hosts are a bit different, where they're more used to soak up wounds from other units than doing mortal wounds, but that's due to changes in the Nighthawk rules. Some of the Stormcast stuff, and it's more taking away things like rerolls or bonuses against specific factions tend to be gone as well.
Yeah, and a lot of it is just simplifying as well and getting rid of some slightly more wacky abilities. And actually, unlike Conquest, this didn't coincide with any changes in the Stormcast or Nighthawk books. The new books we're talking about come out subsequently. The rules were valid throughout the whole length of the collection.
Yeah, we played a game with 3rd edition, but that was before the new army books that came out.
Yeah.
One of the main issues of the magazine is the first 30 games, I think, were all just battles to the death. Conquest had much more variety even early on, where there was you had to take it had objectives in the first game, I think, or second game involved objectives, or there was an objective that you had to pick up and take to a board edge or kill a specific enemy model. And there wasn't really any of that for a long time, and even the objective games just amounted to holding them.
There was much less variety, and with Conquest, some of the missions didn't really work, but they were quite inventive, even the ones that didn't work that well. Whereas in this, they were much less inventive with the missions.
Even deployment styles, I think, we were always on the same edges, the same terrain layout.
I think it was most noticeable in the Realm of Life era, when we were just on the same board with the same terrain, with the same objectives, the same deployment zone most of the time. It was only the models that changed. Sometimes the balance of them was quite off as well. Well, actually, we did keep track of the total number of games won. And so by the end, over all the games, the Stormcast won 46 and the Nighthawk won 34. That's not really the whole story, because the first 60 issues, the Stormcast won 40 and the Nighthawk won 22. There was a massive imbalance there, but in the final 20 issues, the Stormcast only won 6 and the Nighthawk won 12, and 3 of those Stormcast victories were actually on the tiny single board rather than the large board. So basically what we saw was, as we progressed through, the Stormcast did really well on small boards where the Nighthawk couldn't manoeuvre around, and the Stormcast could do a lot of blowing up of spirit flasks and that kind of thing. And then it changed quite dramatically when several things happened, mostly at the same time, which was the boards got bigger, so the Nighthawk could spread out a lot more. The games turned more into objective-holding games, where the Nighthawk had an advantage with speed and number of models, and we were allowed to pick our armies, which I think was the first time we did that was issue 60.
Yeah, because early on, I think we established that Chain Rasps and Glaive Wraiths don't do well against Segretors.
But then later on, you were able to pick your own armies, and you brought lots of Harridans and Bladegheists and the Night Shrouds and the Shroud Guard Battalion, or basically all the good options.
Yeah, I mean, that had its own issue, is that I basically had the same army every time.
Yeah.
But I think that's more the problem then was with the units available.
Yeah.
Whereas I do have the Nighthawk 3rd edition book, and I do think they're much more better balanced internally as well. Yeah, and we were also missing the Nighthawk rules like Wave of Terror and the Terrifying rule where enemies got -1 bravery. It doesn't do that anymore, but that would have made a difference.
Yeah, you were forced to use the death faction rules the whole time.
Yeah,
which
I don't think those death rules are even relevant anymore.
The Stormcast didn't get their faction-specific rules and artifacts and so forth either, but I don't think that made nearly as much of a difference, because at least at the time in the Stormcast book, really the only thing they gained a benefit from was the ability to deploy anywhere on the table. A bit like we saw in the last game, actually, sort of teleporting in.
Yeah, I believe the Nighthawk also had that rule as one of theirs. Yeah, and we didn't really get any of that as well, which also sort of made there was less... it's kind of weird they didn't introduce that rule at all, especially seeing as we have the Fast Riders who are a better version of it.
Well, the Fast Riders even said on their War Scroll when deploying using Signs of the Storm and gave a tutorial on how to use it, but never told us what Signs of the Storm actually was.
Yeah, so pretty sure we didn't miss it.
No, we didn't. And basically the same thing the Celestin Prime does. The whole Stormcast army, in theory, you could keep part of it back to do that. And that would have been handy, but I don't think it was as much of a loss as the Nighthawk not having their faction rules, which
Age of Sigmar doesn't really have any equivalent to power that 40k has, which is a sort of rough guideline. They just has points, and seeing as we weren't given the points values for any of these units, it was just guesswork, basically, as to what units would be better than others.
Yeah. And that ties into sort of the models we got for each of the factions, because, for example, talking about the Stormcast, they gave us the set, which would be the 3 Evocators on Dracolines with the option to make a Lord Arcanum. But because they told us to make the Lord Arcanum, it left us with 2 Evocators on Dracolines, and then they were a 2-unit choice unit, or 2 troops choice unit in the games, which was kind of it's kind of, like if there were 3 for 2-unit choices, I think that would have been pretty effective. But 2 just weren't very good, and then for some reason 2 prosecutors for. Well, the 2 prosecutors was kind of completely inexplicable, because 3 prosecutors is hardly an overpowered unit. So I just never took 2 prosecutors because it was never worth having it for 4 wounds worth of models.
Yeah, and some of the units, so that if it's just 1 choice each, then some units are just going to be flat out better choices. Like Sequitors are just better Liberators.
Yes, and the 2 Evocators can very rarely accomplish as much as 2 other units. Or similarly, like I could take 4 Gryph-hounds, which is less than the minimum unit size of 6, technically. And they're not... 4 Gryph-hounds were effective sometimes, sure, but they're not as good as 5 Sequitors. Well,
and even then, a lot of the Nighthawk units are technically under strength, because normally you take a unit of 10 Blade Geists or 10 Harridans.
That's true, and I suppose 10 Blade Geists may or may not be equivalent to 5 Sequitors. It depends who charges, or it depends who hits first, I think, but... 10 Blade Geist is certainly completely different. I know it was obviously they were trying to internally balance them for the magazine, and the fact that they're not giving us a fully fledged, ready to play army. Really, they're giving us starter armies, and some of those obviously are going to have smaller units in them. And if the unit choice was 10 Blade Geists or 10 Harridans, then I guess they'd have to jig the Stormcast around a bit to make it fair. So I understand what they've done, it's just it had some slightly weird
and having units of 10 Chain Rasps as well. I mean, also again, it's probably so, if I had a unit of 20 Chain Rasps, I'd probably take it a lot more often because I'd just swamp objectives with it.
Yeah.
But that's like the worst possible size of Chain Rasp at the time, because they don't... Now their special ability doesn't matter on the actual number of units. I think it's just if they charge, they get the bonus. And 10 of them was like the optimum. That's when they start taking big damage from Fireball and Spirit Blast as well.
And actually, it's a good point you bring up, because the last lot of games were on the Realm of Fire. Fireball actually had a sort of weird balance implication in that 10 Chain Rasps was a bad idea. It was the same with the Spirit Flask, actually. They were a bad idea because they took extra damage from... And it's just that magical 10 that causes that. And the same... to some extent with the terrain rules for the Realm of Fire, is the fact we don't really want to go in the terrain because it's all volcanic and hot, which sort of relegated the terrain to be mostly just a spectator, just a thing to make the battle look nice.
Yeah, well, I do think terrain generally is less important in Age of Sigmar compared to 40k because there's much less shooting.
Yes, that's true. But it did mean that all of those special rules that they gave us for the terrain very rarely came into effect because we didn't really want to go near the terrain. And when we did put units near it, I inevitably rolled 6s and hurt my own stuff with the volcanic rules.
We don't actually get that much terrain. Well, I say we don't get that much terrain, but when we actually had it all on the board, it did feel a bit cramped. So there you go. It is enough terrain.
A decent amount.
I get a bit boring using the same ones over and over again, but
models themselves they chose to give us were, like with Conquest, a lot of them were easy to build or single pose models from the starter sets, which makes sense because for beginners it's easier. It teaches you how to do models without them being in many, many parts that you have to pick from. So it makes sense to give. Makes sense for a lot of the models we got. We didn't get that many multi-part kits, things like the Judicators or the Mortis engine, obviously, but like the Hex Wraiths.
Vanguard Raptors.
Yeah, but for the most part, we didn't have that many choices. They were all fixed pose.
Most of the Nighthawk stuff is mono pose. There's no options anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I would say the Nighthawk collection is pretty comprehensive. You'd swap out the Mortis engine for the Black Coach, and you'd actually have a complete Nighthawk collection, I think.
Yeah, I don't think there was any model missing apart from the Black Coach at the time. Since they've since had some more things come out, but we can't fault them for that because they didn't exist at the time. The Stormcast obviously is a huge range, so it's a different thing entirely.
There's all the heavy cavalry. There's the heavy Dracothian cavalry. A lot of the characters we didn't get. Didn't really get any of the Vanguard stuff.
Yeah,
not very much of it anyway.
There was a huge range of stuff they had to choose from, and obviously it made sense they would give us the stuff from the Soul Wars box set, which was the starter set at the time, and the Thunderstrike Brotherhood actually is another good one. That was actually the contents of the first edition Age of Sigmar starter set, so again, all simple models to put together.
We were just missing the, there was a Lord Celestant on Taurlon or something like that came with it. Yeah. It did come with a hero unit, but which we didn't get.
And actually, both forces were hero heavy. That's fine, it's the same as Conquest, they're giving you a starting off collection, so you get lots of heroes because heroes are interesting and they do different things and they're characterful models.
I mean, they look impressive. Maybe they save on shipping costs. I don't know, or maybe they're cheaper to actually produce. I mean, it works out well because you get a lot of savings. Some of the Stormcast stuff you could probably proxy as other things. I know Knave Black Talon there's the generic Knight Venator. No, not Knight Venator. Knight Zephyros. That's it. Probably use Zandra as a evocator if you really wanted to. Yeah, there's some proximal things.
Yeah, and in general, the Stormcast collection has a good variety of units, despite not nearly covering their entire range. You get a good selection of stuff, including stuff that was the sort of the latest models at the time, if you like.
Yeah, it's a pretty good collection of the Sacrosanct Chamber, at least.
Yeah, supplemented by bits from the other chambers, I think, as well, which is, it's pretty good. I mean, just seeing it actually arrayed out, it actually looks pretty impressive, both collections for that matter. The intention of this magazine is, because it's for beginners mostly, they're never going to supply you with 60 chain rafts, for example, with the magazine, because that's not suitable for beginners.
Yeah, and it'd be very boring.
It's boring.
And I think they wanted to show a lot of variety as well.
Yeah, so. And there is a lot of variety in the Nighthaunt range. I mean, they're all ghosts, I suppose, but there's quite a lot of different types of ghosts.
I mean, you can see it all there.
Yeah, so it's good to have quite a lot of different units, and it's a good starting point because it means you can branch out into what you actually enjoyed from the collection and what you want to collect more of.
With Conquest, we did do a video on how to expand the armies. We probably won't do that. We're not going to do that here, probably because we'd have to go over everything that has changed first. But you can probably, with a Nighthaunt, basically just buy more of what you already have.
Yeah.
Well, obviously buy the new book for both sides. At Nighthaunt, just keep going with what you have. All of the Dreadblade Harrows especially are really good now, and seeing as you've got two, seeing as they come in pairs. I mean, the new units add some shooting ability, some more mobility with the named Boatman, and the Scriptural Mortis at least is an amusing novelty. I haven't actually tried them out in a game yet.
Yeah, the only disappointment with the Nighthaunt collection, I think, is the Mortis engine. Well, I say it's a disappointment. It's not a disappointment, it's a great model, but it's not a Nighthaunt model.
Yes, it's a Soulblight Gravelords model, which Nighthaunt can take Soulblight Gravelords as allied units, but I don't think it really fits that much. They wouldn't benefit. Like, it wouldn't have the Nighthaunt Wave of Terror rules, it wouldn't be ethereal, its bonus wouldn't apply to any of the Nighthaunt units, although I don't think Soulblight Gravelords have actually had a new book yet for 3rd edition, so maybe it will change. So there's one war scroll that's not out of date.
Yeah, we talked about that in the issue where we got it, but that just feels like it's because they didn't want to give us the Black Coach because it's a much newer and more expensive model, basically. That would be a very, very good saving if you got the Black Coach with this magazine, so I can see why they didn't. Whereas with the Stormcast, they've got such a huge range to start with that you could basically add any of it. I'll readily admit I'm not a Stormcast expert. I haven't seen the new book, actually, so I don't know what units are worth adding now, even. But to be honest, that's never really been our approach anyway. It's not really a...
Yeah, just pick the units you think look the best. That's usually what goes. I think that works a lot more in Age of Sigmar than it would in 40k. Ultimately, that is the way to go. It's your army, buy what you want.
You have a large collection of heroes. I think you have most of the... By no means all, but you have a good selection of heroes to lead the Stormcast, so they probably just need more troops, and possibly more fast options as well, because I think a lot of it is foot-slogging infantry, and, well, obviously allowing for the fact that in theory they can all teleport in.
Yeah, and you could certainly basically probably make 3 separate armies out of the Storm Collection as a base. You could have the sort of old style Redeemer Chamber, whatever, the first wave of Stormcast. You got the Liberators with the Celestant Prime and the Night Questor fits with them. And then you can have a Sacrosanct Chamber wing and then a Vanguard wing with Knave Black Talon. Probably the only thing that's lacking is the Vanguard things, but...
Yeah. Well, and the very new stuff that obviously come out since the magazine, which you can totally get, but, they didn't exist at the time the magazine came out, so we can't blame them for not putting those.
But you could effectively treat it as 3 separate forces and just expand the ones you like the most.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the issue with Stormcast is that there's a lot of sort of redundancy with units that offer fairly similar roles. I mean, I think Liberators and Secretors are very similar now with the new rules. Liberators, I think they are slightly better for holding objectives, possibly because they get a benefit to doing that. But Secretors are maybe slightly more versatile option. Probably wouldn't go too wrong with either of them.
I think more so with the Stormcast as well, you will have to buy more models to meet the minimum unit requirements now as well, like another Evocator on Dracoline, which, as we said, is a little bit bizarre. They chose to go that way. And the same with like Retributors. Evocators, I'm not sure if they have a minimum unit size of 3, but it might be 5. Because you can't get these 3 anymore. You can only get them in 5s.
Yeah, Prosecutors might be 5 as well. Because the comic book says a 5. To be perfectly honest, I'd probably just use the Lord Arcanum as an extra Evocator and Dracoline. 8 Castigators, not sure their unit size is now either.
No, it's probably not 4 like the magazine
did.
And
11 Secretors with 3 primes again.
You can make 2 units of 5 out of the Secretors at least, like we did often. Yeah, it's broadly speaking a good starting point for both, I think. I don't think there can be many complaints. The complaints about the collection are more in the weird things the magazine did with it rather than the collection itself. Both collections are fantastic, I think. And again, mentioned the price savings, so... And just another brief word on the terrain as well. I mean, yes, it's a good collection of terrain, I think, and as you said, it fills out a board this size reasonably well. You don't need that much in Age of Sigmar, really.
Although, I believe these battle mats are bigger than the sort of regular size battle mats you use now, but the extra space is actually quite handy. They're larger than the minimum size, I should say.
Yeah, but there's just a few extra inches on over there, and it's not like
we got 4 big battle mats, whereas we only got 3, and these all on the side you see now, at least all fit together. Slightly boring to play on the same layout every time, but it is nice that they all fit a theme, whereas with Conquest we got 3 different boards. That was a little bit odd when you had them all together.
Yeah, and actually it was nice to have 4 different realms to play, and we didn't get the rules for most of them until quite late, but it was nice that we had that movement around. Not mentioning the quality of the games we had on them again, but in general, just the aesthetics was interesting to have 4 different ones.
At least it's a multi-realm spanning narrative.
Yeah, so that was quite good. And then the fact that you had the other side, I think that was a really good thing they did with this, because with Conquest, was the same boards every time, and they did fit together, but with this, having the realm board on one side and then having the large board on the other, I think that was a really good idea. And it does leave you with a complete battlefield, effectively, when you're done.
Yeah, it's a unified one.
Yeah, which...
Yeah, I think, as we said, it's a little bit boring that that battle mat had to represent all of the realms and the same terrain as well. They're all sort of blended together. But once you're finished, that's the issue with the narrative. When it all looks good, when it all look good together, and the terrain certainly fits with the shattered realm look of it as well.
Much as we said for Conquest as well, it is a really good thing about this magazine is that by getting this whole collection, not only do you get 2 armies, you actually get a load of terrain and some boards, because particularly if you've got a limited budget and stuff, terrain and boards might not be something you would necessarily prioritise, but with this, because you get it for a discounted price, you get a complete setup, and having the card boards, they're perfectly adequate.
Yeah, they're easy to store.
Not
as durable as a battle mat would be, but certainly much cheaper and easier to store.
Yeah, and so it saves you having to put books and things on the terrain, or cups or whatever, just to pretend to be terrain. You actually get some very nicely sculpted terrain that you can paint up, and it might not be something that people necessarily do. Depends on your interests, but...
and it's really handy for beginners who don't have anything at all. The terrain as well is very easy to paint, starting with white, and it looks really good with the white weathered look. And even the two armies we got are both fairly forgiving armies to actually play. Fairly simple rules. Even the Nighthawk are fairly beginner friendly. Fragile-ish, but fairly friendly, especially with the new book where everything's very standardised. And the Stormcast are very durable.
Yeah, they're big and chunky.
And Nighthawk perhaps not the easiest to build from a beginner's perspective, especially things like the Mortis engine. There's lots of very fragile, spooky bits and iconography, but very easy to paint. And the Stormcast, again, very easy to paint because they're so chunky. Fairly easy to put together as well. Exceptions being things like the Knight Azeroth and the Celestant Prime, or the Prosecutors with the wings that you could easily break. But again, fairly easy. They're mostly one colour or two colours, gold and blue, so...
And obviously the Stormcast range being entirely new within the last 5 years, they're all very good quality sculpts. The Night One have a few sort of bloopers, like the Hex Wraiths are not really very good. They don't stand up to the modern style, really, and they don't go together quite so well, as we said when we got them. But that's just the limitations of the range, it's not the magazine's fault.
Even though it's not a technical Nighthawk model, the Mortis engine certainly fits the range.
Yes.
And even like the Tomb Banshee and the Cairn Wraith are both fairly older models. They at least fit the aesthetic of newer units as well.
Yeah, so overall it looks pretty well.
Definitely, as I said for Conquest, also probably safe and as well. Very good, certainly good value for beginners. Really good also if, say, you're a parent and you have a child who's interested in getting into wargaming, I suppose, or Age of Sigmar specifically, because then they can have their own things to do and you can paint along with them and that sort of thing. And they can be the good guys and you'll be the bad guys or whatever. So it's good from that, a good way to teach someone as well.
Yeah, and doesn't break the bank either, because it's, well, I suppose, because it's only...
It is expensive, because part of magazines are expensive, but it is cheaper than going out and buying all these models separately.
Yeah, and it's spread over the course of, 80 weeks, so it's not you don't have to shell out all at once, I guess. So.
Yeah, and it would be an interesting... if you were a veteran hobbyist, you could always buy the magazine and paint along with the guides as well. Maybe try and do... just to keep up with the magazine, that might be an interesting thing to do. You could always buy individual magazines. Let's say, as we got ours from the News Agent, because they came weekly rather than 4 magazines monthly, you can always buy individual issues if you just wanted those models as well.
Yeah, and some people did. I mean, particularly things like the 10 chain rasp issue. If you wanted lots of chain rasps, you could get a few of those and that sort of thing. So, and I think people did do that. I think in some respects, some of them were too good at saving on that. Like the first issue being that was the 13 models for £3. I think that was a little bit too good. They learnt their lesson in Imperium, and it was just 2 heroes in the first.
Well, I suppose I could also add that coming into this, I didn't really have that much interest in playing Age of Sigmar. I had a passing interest in Warhammer Fantasy, but never really got into it and wasn't too interested in the setting once it got changed. But I do actually really enjoy playing the Nighthawk now, especially in 3rd edition. It's actually quite a fun game. It probably is actually in a better state than Warhammer 40k is, but there's plenty of discussion about that online. So if that's not... if you want to... So it certainly worked on getting me into the system.
Yeah, I think me to some extent as well. I do have an Age of Sigmar army, mostly still in boxes, but yes, I probably can say after 80 issues of playing the Stormcast Eternals that I'm not actually a huge fan of them, to be perfectly honest. And to me, they actually lack a bit of character, but that might have just been the magazine's presentation of them as well. And again, they have a new book, which I haven't seen, so that might improve things. They're not my personal favoured army. Certainly, I did enjoy playing the game in general. We do hope to have some more Age of Sigmar content on the channel at some point. The new Stormbreaker magazine theoretically will be coming out next year, so hopefully that will go ahead, and we'll hope to cover that, I think. Otherwise, we might have some more episodes in our Beyond Mortal Realms series.
Yeah, we might have a look into Path to Glory or something like that.
So if you have any ideas of things you'd like to see Age of Sigmar wise on the channel, then let us know. Otherwise, we'll have more 40k content continuing as usual, and maybe a few other bits and pieces from time to time. Thank you very much for watching our Mortal Realms series. Do check out other things on our channel if you're interested. We've been the Tabletop Donkeys, and we'll see you another time.
Bye for now.